Hey guys, tonight we begin in a place where sand stretches to the horizon, the sky glows gold even after sunset, and every gust of wind feels like a whispered warning from 1,000 years ago. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a land of gods, gold, and more daily suffering than your Monday morning meeting. Here, the Nile may be majestic, but the heat is personal. It doesn't just shine, it attacks. And tonight, you might not make it out alive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun, because in this place, sleep ends when the heat decides it does. Your bed is a straw mat on a dirt floor, and your pillow is just last week's tunic. It smells like yesterday's sweat and tomorrow's regret. There are no windows, just holes in the mud brick wall where bugs conduct their early morning orchestra. You sit up, and your back cracks like dry papyrus. Welcome to another glorious day under the watchful eyes of the gods and the relentless judgment of Ra, the sun god, who apparently thinks your suffering is part of the natural order. The first thing you feel is grit in your eyes, on your tongue, between your toes. Dust isn't just a nuisance here, it's a personality trait. You step outside and immediately regret it. The sun hasn't even crested the cliffs yet, and already the air feels like a heated oven preheating for some kind of spiritual roast. There's no breeze. The Nile's legendary freshness? That's upstream somewhere, probably having brunch with the crocodiles. Your tunic clings to you like a curse. It offers no relief, just fabric-shaped despair. You shuffle past your neighbor's house, which looks exactly like yours because, well, everyone here lives in what can generously be described as adobe survival cubes. Mud brick boxes with flat roofs and dreams of someday being cooler. The streets are narrow and packed with people already at work, because if you don't start early, the sun will kill you before your chores do. You pass a priest. He's clean, perfumed, and judging you. He probably works at the temple, where shade and free food are perks of the job. You, however, are not a priest. You are a regular citizen, which means your existence is a continuous loop of sweat, dust, and tasks you didn't volunteer for. The river glimmers in the distance. It's beautiful from afar, like an oasis in a painting. But up close, it's a symphony of smells that range from overripe fish to decomposing surprise. Still, this is where you bathe, not because it's refreshing, but because it's slightly less disgusting than not bathing. Soap? Dream on. You use sand. Yes, literal sand. You exfoliate like a cursed statue. Next to you, someone is doing laundry by beating it against a rock and praying the crocodiles are full. A child pees upstream, a goat drinks downstream. You fill your jar and just accept it. Because in Egypt, survival means compromise, and possibly parasites. On your way back, you catch a glimpse of the royal palace in the distance, a grand silhouette rising out of the desert like a promise you were never invited to share. It's marble, polished, and protected by guards who have never touched a plow in their lives. Somewhere inside, a pharaoh is being fanned with ostrich feathers while sipping fermented date wine. You, on the other hand, are already sunburnt and haven't eaten. Breakfast? It's a slice of bread with the consistency of sandstone. It tastes like history and not the good kind. If you're lucky, there might be some beer to wash it down, not the cold, bubbly kind. This is ancient Egyptian beer, thick, sour, and chewy. Yes, chewy. As you eat, flies circle your head like you're the main course. You swat at them half-heartedly. They're not afraid. They were here before you, and they'll be here long after. The bread crunches in your mouth with a generous sprinkling of sand from the grinding stone. You wonder how many teeth you'll have left by the time you're 30. Statistically, not many. Your neighbor walks by with a bucket of dung for the kiln. You nod like, this is normal, because it is. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where you build monuments by day and dream of basic hygiene by night. And if you think this is rough, remember, this was the easy part. You haven't even started working yet. You've barely digested your sand-bread breakfast when reality hits. It's time to work. Not check emails and stretch kind of work. This is full body, full sun, full suffering labor. Unless you're one of the pampered few born into temples or royalty, your day job involves sweat, dust, and at least one tool that could double as a blunt weapon. You're a farmer today. And by farmer, we mean human scarecrow with back problems. The Nile has receded, finally, leaving behind a glorious layer of rich black silt. Farmers call it the gift of the flood. You call it mud that wants to eat your sandals. You step into the fields and immediately sink. Great. You're ankle deep in swamp porridge and it's not even noon. Your tools, a wooden plow, a rope, and whatever patience you didn't burn through yesterday. There are no tractors, no gloves, no ergonomic anything. If you want shade, you're out of luck. Trees, luxury. Hats, also luxury. Your only protection is the linen rag tied around your head, which is now doing a very poor job impersonating sunscreen. Nearby, a supervisor, shirtless, sunburnt, and perpetually angry, barks orders. His main talent is yelling. His secondary talent is having zero empathy. You're bent over, planting barley like your life depends on it. Because guess what? It does. Mess this up and your family starves. And also gets fined in grain taxes, because nothing says motivation like the looming threat of starvation and debt. And just when you think your knees might revolt, the fieldwork shifts. Now it's time to haul water jars from the Nile. Each one is about half your weight and has the balance of an angry toddler on a sugar high. You sling it over your shoulder and wobble through the dust. One wrong move, and congratulations, you're soaked, and will now spend the rest of the day looking like a walking swamp. If you're not a farmer, maybe you're on temple construction duty, which is a fancy way of saying you're hauling 2-ton blocks under the sun while barefoot. The ramp you're dragging these things up was probably designed by someone who hates people. Your reward for reaching the top? Doing it again, and again, and again, with a bonus blister. Inside the temple walls, scribes are documenting your toil because someone has to write the heroic tale of how anonymous laborer number 812 died nobly while trying not to pass out. You don't get a break. You get barked at, you don't get shade, you get sandals full of burning sand. And if you mess up, if you drop a block, chip a stone wrong, or just faint from heat stroke, you might be replaced or punished. Or if you're really unlucky, cursed. Because some of these temples are for dead kings, and ancient Egypt is big on curses. You know, anyone who disrupts this tomb will be eaten by hippos and also stub their toe for eternity, kind of stuff. Women aren't spared either. Your wife, mother, sister, they're home grinding grain, fetching water, weaving linen, and somehow also raising 5 kids. Domestic labor? Still labor. And unlike the men, they don't even get the occasional breeze from the river. Their day is all smoke from the hearth, steam from cooking pots, and the distinct aroma of, oh no, the baby found the goat again. You work until the sun starts to sink. Not because the work is done, but because your body is staging a quiet rebellion. Your hands are blistered, your back is a tragedy, and your soul left around noon. You drag yourself home, where the mud brick walls have stored all the heat from the day and generously release it now, like a slow-cooked oven of disappointment. You sit. You breathe. You smell like everything you stepped in, and you haven't even had dinner yet. Dinner in ancient Egypt is less of a meal and more of a test of your optimism. You're not sitting at a table. There is no table. You squat near a clay hearth that belches more smoke than warmth, and the firewood it's chewing through was probably dried goat dung. Yes, dung. In Egypt, even your fuel supply judges you. What's on the menu? Well, it depends on your class, and since you're not bathing in perfume or lounging under a palm canopy, let's assume you're solidly in the please don't let this be spoiled tier of society. First up, bread. Again. But now it's slightly charred because the communal oven is hotter than Ra's forehead and nobody calibrated the fire because nobody invented thermometers yet. The loaf is flatter than your hopes and grittier than your laundry water. Every bite includes a generous crunch of sand, courtesy of the stone grinding process. It's not food, it's edible erosion. Next, beer. Not to celebrate, just to survive. Thick, warm, and suspiciously chewy, it's more like drinking fermented oatmeal. But hey, it's better than Nile water, which may or may not currently contain a floating goat. The beer is mildly intoxicating, which is great because it dulls the taste of everything else. If you're lucky, you might get a few dried dates or a scoop of lentils that have been cooked until they resemble ancient paste. Protein? Only if something unfortunate recently fell into a trap. Fish? Maybe. But if your cousin caught it, chances are it was undercooked, oversmoked, or stolen by a cat before it made it to the pot. And remember, you're not eating alone. Your family is here. Your neighbor might be here. Even that guy who never leaves but no one has the heart to kick out, he's here too. All crammed in a tiny room, sweating, chewing, and trying not to cry when a sand flea crawls across the lentils. You'd love to wipe your face, but the only cloth available smells like last week's laundry, and that laundry was never done, so you just blink the sweat away and focus on breathing. Shallow breaths. The room smells like smoke, onions, human, and something that used to be a sock. Now, let's talk about lighting. There's no switch to flick, no cozy candle in a decorative holder. If you're lucky, there's an oil lamp, a clay bowl with a wick, fueled by rancid animal fat. It flickers with the enthusiasm of a nervous intern and produces more soot than light. You don't just smell it, you become it. By the end of the night, your nostrils are outlined in black like you're halfway through an ancient eyeliner tutorial. After dinner, chores continue. No one's off the hook. Someone has to sweep the floor, dirt sweeping dirt, fetch more water, enjoy your night stroll through mosquito country, and prep the next day's bread with flour that has more pebbles than grains. If there's livestock, someone's cleaning their pen, which smells like a mixture of wet hay, regret, and what can only be described as aromatic despair. And just when you think you can rest, the baby cries. Not your baby? Doesn't matter. In this house, everyone's baby is your baby. It takes a village, and that village lives in your room. As night falls, the air cools slightly, and the insects come alive with renewed vengeance. There are no bug screens, no sprays, no coils. You sleep next to the wall and pray the scorpions haven't claimed it first. You lie back down on your straw mat. It pokes your ribs like it's mad at you. You pull a linen sheet over yourself that's too short and smells like the Nile's bad week. Privacy? A joke. You're surrounded by family, neighbors, and possibly a chicken no one admits to owning. You hear snoring, the distant bark of a dog, the soft plop of something falling from the ceiling that you really hope is just dirt. And through the open ceiling hole, you see the stars, brilliant, ancient, cold. The same stars the pharaohs watched, the same stars the gods supposedly roam. But you're not thinking about gods, you're thinking about tomorrow, about the field, about the sun, about how your back already hurts and you haven't even moved yet. And still somehow you sleep, because your body, exhausted beyond logic, knows this truth. Tomorrow won't be easier. It'll just be another day in ancient Egypt. You wake up in the pre-dawn darkness, your face sticky with sweat and straw imprints stamped across your cheek like a failed hieroglyphic. The stars are still visible, mocking you with their cold detachment. Your joints creak like ungreased hinges. Every part of your body issues a formal complaint, but none of them get a reply. You rise anyway, because in ancient Egypt, the sun isn't your friend. It's your shift manager. Today, it's not farming, it's state labor. Which sounds fancy until you realize that state labor is just government speak for free construction help, specifically pyramid duty. Yes, those towering wonders of the ancient world, you're helping build one. Not at the top, not carving inscriptions, not posing for history. You're at the bottom, hauling things. The work site is already a frenzy. Men shouting, dust flying, and a ramp that stretches toward the sky like it's daring you to climb. A priest in white linen supervises the loading of limestone blocks that weigh more than your extended family. Scribes scurry around with scrolls documenting things like grain quotas and who dropped what on whose foot. You're handed a rope. That's your tool. Rope, willpower, and a lot of yelling. You and a team of 20 others begin pulling. The block slides forward grudgingly, groaning like a haunted ox. The ramp is steep, and the gravel slips under your sandals, which are held together by faith and friction. You lean back, every muscle in your body screaming as your hands start to blister. There's no safety gear. If someone lets go, you're crushed, literally. And if you survive, you still get yelled at. Nearby, water carriers dash in, splashing the sand in front of the block to reduce friction. It helps a little, not enough. And if you slip, well, let's just say you'll be the next offering to the gods. Because in ancient Egypt, accidents happen, and they get quietly buried under the next layer of stone. Breaks are rare. If you're lucky, there's a mid-morning pause where someone hands out beer and bread. Not out of kindness, out of necessity. If you drop dead, you're not useful. The bread is the usual, dense, dry, and questionably crunchy. The beer is warm, thick, and mildly sour. But in this heat, it tastes like salvation. You look around. There's a guy with a dislocated shoulder still trying to carry sand, another with a bleeding foot limping back to his post because no one has time for wounds. A third man is collapsed in the shade, eyes closed, lips cracked. Someone pours a bit of beer into his mouth and mutters a prayer to Anubis, just in case. There's no workers' union, no sick days, no medical tent. If you're injured, you're either patched up with linen strips and a prayer, or replaced. And the only compensation is not dying today. It's brutally fair in a way that only a 3,000-year-old system can be. By noon, the sun is merciless. Your tunic is soaked. Your skin burns. The stone ramp radiates heat like it's furious at your presence. Even your bones are sweating. You want to stop, but the foreman's whip whistles through the air. Not always as a punishment, sometimes just as a reminder that it's still there. The gods watch from the temple carvings nearby. Carved into the stone, they smile with serenity while you sweat on their doorstep. You wonder if they ever did a day of lifting. Ra? Probably never touched a shovel. Osiris? Too busy judging souls. You're out here playing how many blisters can a person get before they become permanent. As the day drags on, you're moved to brick stacking duty. Simpler, but just as punishing. Your job is to take these mud bricks soaked and heavy and line them precisely on the outer shell of a storehouse. It's like Tetris, but if the pieces crumble and your supervisor hisses in your ear like an angry cat, you misalign one, you redo 10 with your bare hands. Sometimes the pharaoh himself rides by on a chariot, golden, gleaming, flanked by guards with shaved heads and stern faces. He doesn't look at you. Maybe he never will. But you see him. And for a second, you imagine what it might be like to wear silk instead of sweat, to eat dates that haven't been dropped in the sand, to have a name that's remembered, not just a number in a worker registry. The sun finally begins to dip. The shadows lengthen. Someone rings a gong, a sound so beautiful it might as well be divine. Work ends, not because the job is done, but because the day is. You're allowed to stop, for now. You limp home. Your legs feel like reeds. Your arms are noodles. Your tunic sticks to your skin like disappointment. Every step kicks up dust, and every breath tastes like sandstone. But you're alive. You didn't fall. You didn't drop anything. You weren't cursed. And in ancient Egypt, that's a win. The stars are back, glittering over the Nile like tiny gods judging your choices. You're back on your straw mat, skin throbbing from the day's abuse, every muscle wondering who gave the order to exist. You'd think after pyramid hauling, your day would end with peace. But this is ancient Egypt. The concept of rest is more myth than reality. Tonight, the dangers shift. You're not wrestling stone blocks anymore. You're dodging your own house. Your mud brick home may look solid, but solid here is a matter of opinion. The walls were slapped together with river mud, straw, and blind optimism. There's no reinforcement, no beams, no guarantees. When it rains, rare but catastrophic, the walls melt. Literally. Your living room turns into a slow-motion landslide. And if you live near the floodplain, congratulations, you now have waterfront property and nowhere to sleep. Inside, things aren't much safer. The ceiling, made of reeds and hope, occasionally drops bits of dried vegetation into your dinner. Sometimes a lizard. Once, a squirrel. You remember that night vividly. It ended with someone screaming and the pot of lentils being launched across the room like a javelin. But wildlife is just one of the nightly hazards. There's also fire. Your oil lamp, glorious, smoky, and temperamental, is basically an open invitation for disaster. One misplaced jar, one enthusiastic elbow, and your entire home becomes an offering to the gods of spontaneous combustion. There's no fire brigade. Your neighbor might throw a bucket at it. That's the plan. Oh, and let's not forget the pests. Scorpions like the warmth, spiders the size of anxiety, fleas, they live with you. They're not visitors, they're residents. The real landlord. You've tried everything. Herbs, incense, even one of those weird priest chants. Nothing works. They bite you, mock you, and then invite friends. Sleeping isn't easy. Every rustle is suspect. You wrap yourself in your linen sheet like a burrito of hope, but it's thin and your feet stick out. Ancient Egyptian sheets are not designed for coverage or comfort. They're more decorative suggestion than functional textile. And once you finally doze off, drifting into that precious half-sleep, you're jolted awake by a new sound. Coughing. Your grandmother's. Your child's. Maybe yours. Because illness Illness is a roommate. There's no germ theory, no Tylenol, no vaccines, just amulets, prayers, and occasionally a mixture of crocodile dung and honey that someone swears will balance your spirit. You don't question it, you drink it. It tastes like betrayal. Colds aren't minor, they linger, worsen, evolve into full-blown, why is his eye leaking situations. Infections? Good luck. If it doesn't drain naturally, it becomes a family project. Fevers are terrifying, not just because of the burning skin and hallucinations, but because everyone knows high fevers sometimes mean death. And in ancient Egypt, death lives next door, sometimes literally. Tombs are everywhere. If someone dies in your household, the process begins immediately. Mourning is ceremonial. The body must be preserved quickly in this heat, or it'll attract flies faster than you can say mummification. But here's the thing. Mummification is expensive. You can't just walk into a temple and ask for a deluxe wrap package. For regular folks, burial is modest. Maybe a small grave near your house. Maybe just a shallow ditch if times are hard. If you're lucky, a piece of pottery with your name scratched on it will mark the spot. No statues, no gold, just silence and the slow return to the dust that coated your breakfast bread. Still, you do your best. You place amulets on the body, whisper spells from memory, ask Anubis to take them gently, and you light a lamp to guide their soul. That lamp flickers. It always flickers. As you lie back down, blinking up at the stars through your open roof hole, you wonder, will that be you soon? Will your children carry you to the edge of town with nothing but a piece of linen and a prayer? But no, not tonight. You're still breathing. Your heart's still pounding like a stubborn drum. And that, in ancient Egypt, means victory. Outside, the Nile murmurs. Inside, someone turns over in their sleep. The oil lamp finally gutters out. Darkness presses in, and you drift. Not because you're comfortable, but because you're too tired to be afraid. Morning again. You don't remember falling asleep, but here you are, alive, upright, and already sweating. Ancient Egypt doesn't do snooze buttons. The sun has punched through your roof hole with all the grace of an angry supervisor, and the noise of daily life is already banging at your ears. Shouting vendors, bleating goats, a baby crying somewhere across the courtyard. But today is not just another day of labor or meals made of regret. Today, someone in your neighborhood has died. And that means something different. Ritual. You didn't know the man well. He was older, quiet, sometimes smelled like fish, but now he's a sacred object. His house has been turned into a place of transition. The priest has arrived in pristine white linen, smelling faintly of incense and superiority. He begins the ceremony. The deceased is being prepped for passage to the next world, not just buried, but judged. And the judgment, it's not symbolic, it's literally written in your belief system. You see, death in ancient Egypt isn't a gentle fade out. It's an entrance exam to eternity, and the gods are strict proctors. When someone dies, their soul begins a perilous journey through the duat, the underworld. It's a realm full of monsters, traps, and celestial paperwork. A kind of cosmic obstacle course, where failure means, well, more than just embarrassment. First up, the Hall of Two Truths. The soul is led in trembling, possibly still confused. At the front stands Osiris, god of the dead, flanked by other terrifying deities with heads of animals and expressions of tax auditors. But the main act? The scale. The scale. On one side, a single feather, the symbol of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice. On the other side, your heart. Not metaphorical, your actual beat-up, sin-soaked, anxious human heart. If your heart is heavier than the feather, that means you were a jerk, a liar, a cheater. Someone who didn't return borrowed amphorae or kicked dogs when no one was looking. And if that happens, if the scale tips the wrong way, you're not going to a nice sunny field of reeds. You're getting eaten. By what, you ask? By Amit, the devourer. Now, Amit is no ordinary demon. She's the stuff of bedtime avoidance strategies. Part lion, part crocodile, part hippo, basically all the most dangerous animals Egypt could summon, Frankenstein into one spiritual blender of doom. If she eats your heart, your soul is annihilated, not punished, not recycled. Gone, no afterlife, no reincarnation, just void. So yeah, high stakes. That's why the Egyptians put so much effort into prepping the body. The heart needed to be pure, or at least convincingly fake pure. And how do you do that? Magic, charm spells, incantations, and most importantly, the Book of the Dead. Don't be fooled by the name. It's not a spooky novel or forbidden scroll. It's more like an ancient cheat sheet. Pages and pages of illustrated spells, prayers, and instructions. Everything you need to navigate the underworld without becoming divine lunch. The family of the deceased is now preparing these texts. Not everyone can afford a full copy, so sometimes it's just a few select spells written on linen or papyrus, tucked into the wrappings. They're designed to do things like unlock gates, outwit demons, and, most importantly, persuade Osiris that you were actually a pretty decent human being. And then comes the wrapping. Mummification, even for modest families, is a massive ordeal. You don't just stick the body in a box. You remove the organs. Yes, all of them. Liver, lungs, stomach, intestines, each lovingly plucked and stored in canopic jars, which are basically themed Tupperware with deity heads. Each jar is guarded by a god. It's like a very intense metaphysical organ locker. The brain? Not worth saving. They yank it out through the nose with a hook. Yes, a hook, and you thought your last sinus infection was bad. The body is then dried using natron salt. Imagine being pickled in spiritual baking soda for 40 days. After that, it's oiled, packed, stuffed with linen, and wrapped. Not once, not twice. We're talking dozens of layers. Each layer may have a prayer, an amulet, or a beetle charm sewn in. All to make sure that when this soul wakes up on the other side, it has a fighting chance. And here's the kicker. This process takes 70 days. 70. That's 10 weeks of drying, wrapping, whispering, and hoping your cousin didn't cheap out on the embalmer. You watch from a respectful distance. You're not part of the inner circle. But it's mesmerizing. The belief, the reverence, the sheer amount of hope packed into this ritual, because deep down, everyone knows they might be next. Death is never far in this land of sun and sand, and still they prepare. Because the field of reeds, the ancient Egyptian version of paradise, is everything this life isn't. Cool breezes, fresh food, no labor, no parasites. You get to sail a perfect Nile, harvest crops with magic tools, and nap under the shade of palm trees that never rot. And if you're lucky, the gods let your soul stay there forever. But only if your heart plays along. Let's say just for a moment that you make it. You pass the scale. Your heart is lighter than a feather, your amulets worked, your incantations didn't mispronounce anything important. You slip past Amit with all your organs intact. Except the brain, of course, but apparently you don't need that in paradise. You enter the field of reeds. Congratulations, eternal vacation unlocked. But that's the dream. Let's talk about the reality, because for the vast majority of ancient Egyptians, that pristine afterlife was as elusive as rain in the desert. You see, eternal life wasn't free, it was luxury tier. To even stand a chance at a smooth underworld journey, you needed two things, money and preparation. If you were poor, and statistically you were, you got the spiritual equivalent of a rush job. Maybe a bit of rapping, a short prayer. If someone remembered, they'd stuff a few charms in your hands. But most of the time, you were placed in a shallow grave with hopes and reused linens. That's right, reused. Mummification, even for commoners, was expensive. If your family couldn't afford the full package, embalmers sometimes cut corners. Less salt, fewer layers, no personalized spells. In some cases, they even rewrapped other people's failed mummies and resold them. Yes, recycled corpses. Ancient Egypt invented upcycling. Meanwhile, if you were royalty, oh, the difference was biblical. Take King Tutankhamun, Tut to his friends. Died young, ruled briefly, and still got a tomb so decked out it could have doubled as a museum. Over 5,000 artifacts were buried with him. Gold, ivory, chariots, furniture, even a lock of his grandmother's hair. Because clearly, when you're dead, you still need seating options and sentimental keepsakes. His body was encased in not one, not two, but 3 nested coffins, the innermost being solid gold. And if that wasn't enough, his face was covered with a gold mask that probably weighs more than your nephew. It's not just a funeral, it's a full-blown red carpet event for the afterlife. But here's the tragic punchline. Almost every royal tomb has been robbed. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. The pyramids, those colossal stone mountains meant to protect the dead, didn't work. Tomb robbers were persistent, creative, and very, very patient. They tunneled in from below, bribed guards, disguised themselves as priests. One group even entered during the funeral. Yeah, during. According to one very dramatic story, during the burial of Ramses II, a king so legendary his name sounds like thunder, his own son noticed a thief mid-procession, digging into the royal tomb. Did he stop him? No, he let him continue. Why? Because he wanted to catch the whole gang. And when he did, the punishment was, let's say, not subtle. The robbers were skewered, literally, and roasted alive over a fire, publicly, slowly, as a warning. The phrase, "don't mess with the dead," wasn't just a vibe, it was law, and they weren't overreacting. In ancient Egypt, tomb raiding wasn't just theft, it was spiritual murder. If you stole someone's grave goods, you were potentially dooming their soul. If you smashed their coffin, you were severing their connection to the next world. And if you destroyed their names, scraped it off the walls, you erased them from eternity altogether. That's why tombs had curses. Oh, yes, actual inscribed warnings, not vague ones either. Specific, terrifying ones like, "Whoever enters here, may the crocodile eat him, may the serpent strike him, may the scorpion sting him, and may his children perish in pain," which honestly feels like overkill, but also effective. Even with curses, the tombs kept getting looted. The priests got smarter. They started hiding the mummies in secret shafts. They created decoy chambers, false doors, trap walls, misleading paths. Some tombs were designed like puzzles. If you want to rob me, enjoy this game of deadly hide and seek. Still, the robbers usually won. In response, a few desperate priests went one step further. They moved the mummies. That's right, around 1000 BCE, in a quiet panic, they relocated dozens of royal mummies from their lavish tombs to a hidden cliffside cave, stacked them like precious scrolls, labeled and bundled. Pharaohs who once ruled empires were now shelf buddies in an emergency corpse storage facility, all to keep them safe from plunder. It worked for a while. Centuries later, that hidden cache was discovered, by more robbers, naturally. Then finally, by archaeologists. Those royal mummies are now on display in museums, embalmed faces still wearing expressions of regal exhaustion, as if they're silently judging how badly we've handled history. And King Tut? Even his tomb wasn't untouched. It was robbed twice before it was sealed forever. When Howard Carter cracked it open in 1922, it wasn't pristine, it was disturbed. Yet somehow, enough treasures remained to stun the world. Gold, jewelry, statues, clothes, even ancient snacks. Apparently, if you're a boy king, your funeral includes your entire closet and a catered meal. But for most Egyptians, peasants, farmers, craftsmen, there were no riches, no tomb paintings, no golden masks, just dust. Maybe a handful of grave goods if the family scraped together a few trinkets, a figurine, a comb, a bread loaf hardened into eternity. And still, they hoped, they believed. Because that's what Egypt was built on. Not just stone and sand, but faith that death wasn't the end. That even if your tomb was small and your body barely preserved, your soul might still find its way, past the monsters, past the scales, into the eternal fields, where maybe, just maybe, the bread is soft. Let's step back for a moment and imagine that somehow, miraculously, you've made it to the afterlife. Your heart passed the test, Amit didn't get a snack, and Osiris gave you a polite nod. You arrive in the Field of Reeds, the ancient Egyptian version of heaven. It's quiet, cool, peaceful. There's food, water, a gentle breeze, and best of all, no supervisors yelling at you. It sounds perfect, but here's the catch. Very few people ever got this far. The majority of ancient Egyptians lived in fear that their preparations wouldn't be enough, that their funeral was too cheap, that their cousin forgot the amulets, that the embalmer was drunk. One misstep, one missed prayer, and your eternity could turn into a cosmic error message. That fear didn't end with the tomb. It lingered. It haunted families for generations. Because in ancient Egypt, death was never just death. It was logistics, planning, paperwork, and performance. And if your descendants didn't keep remembering you, you could vanish from the next world too. That's why names mattered. Names were sacred. A person died 3 times, once when their body failed, once when they were buried, and once when their name was spoken for the last time. To fight that final death, people carved names on tombs, painted them on walls, even scratched them into pottery. Wealthy Egyptians had statues built with inscriptions, "May my name be spoken for 1,000 years." Middle-class folks hoped for a stela, a carved stone tablet with a prayer and their best accomplishments. The poor, maybe their name would survive on a broken dish or in someone's fading memory. But names could also be destroyed, intentionally. This was the ancient version of cancel culture, only it was literal. If someone wanted to erase you from eternity, all they had to do was chip away your name, wipe it from your tomb, scratch it off your coffin, and poof, gone. spiritually deleted. This happened to pharaohs too. Akhenaten, the heretic king who worshipped one sun god and ticked off the priesthood, his name was erased from monuments all over Egypt, statues smashed, inscriptions altered. The message was clear: we don't talk about him. Not because they didn't remember, but because they didn't want to. That's how seriously Egyptians took remembrance. It was their form of immortality. The act of being remembered was part of the afterlife package, so families held rituals long after someone was buried. Offerings were made on death anniversaries, tomb chapels were visited, priests recited the deceased's name during ceremonies, paid of course. Everything in the afterlife was subscription-based. No recurring donation, no spiritual maintenance, and even then, it wasn't foolproof. Grave robbers didn't just steal gold, they trashed names, smashed coffins, burned scrolls. If they hated someone, they could wipe them from this world and the next. Some pharaohs even ordered rivals' names removed posthumously, a political hit job that extended beyond death. You couldn't just win power in life, you had to keep it in death too. To defend against this, some people used false names in burial texts. Decoy identities. If someone erases this name, jokes on them, it's not the real one. Others built multiple statues in different temples, so even if one was defaced, others might survive. An ancient backup system, think Google Drive, but with stone and prayer. And still, names vanished. Time wears everything down. Tombs collapsed, floods swept inscriptions away, families died off. Eventually, someone's name would be said for the last time. Their soul, wandering in the field of reeds, might feel a shiver, and then just stop. This is why memory was sacred. Why even today, Egyptologists study names on broken pottery and weathered walls, trying to whisper them back into the world, trying perhaps to undo a final death. Meanwhile, back in the living world, regular Egyptians did their best to avoid that fate. They told stories, passed down names, recounted tales of great-grandfathers and heroic ancestors, even if the stories got slightly more exaggerated with each telling. Did I ever tell you about my uncle who once outran a crocodile? Yes, probably. 10 times. But say his name again, just in case. For the poor, remembrance was simpler but no less heartfelt. A scratch on a wall, a token left in the corner of a temple, a name whispered during a family meal, a small gesture meant to echo into eternity. And so in ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end of your story. It was a new beginning, with rules, risks, and requirements. Your tomb was your passport. Your name was your lifeline. Your memory was your insurance. It's humbling, really, to know that a civilization so obsessed with permanence was still at the mercy of time, that even with pyramids, gold, and divine backing, the thing they feared most was to be forgotten. So if tonight you remember an ancient name, even one spoken softly through the centuries, you've just done a very Egyptian thing. You've kept a soul alive. You know what's wild? In a land where pharaohs hoarded gold and scribes wrote entire novels on tomb walls, the one thing everyone truly feared was a bad burial. Not death, not disease, not even Amit, the soul-eating chimera from your nightmares. No, the greatest existential crisis in ancient Egypt was the thought of not being buried properly. Because in their world, burial was everything. It wasn't just a formality. It was how you entered the waiting room of eternity. Miss a step, no matter how small, and you could end up wandering the duat like a ghost with bad paperwork, which is why the act of preparing for burial started way before you actually died. People spent decades stockpiling items for their tomb. Not just pharaohs, regular people too. If you could afford it, you'd start early. A coffin, a shopti doll, maybe a linen wrapping or two. Think of it as the ancient version of a prepaid funeral plan, except with more scarabs and fewer brochures. And tombs? Oh, the range was impressive. The rich built multi-room limestone suites carved into cliffs, decorated with painted scenes of what they hoped the afterlife would look like. Lots of food, music, and absolutely no labor. These tombs had offerings, inscriptions, sealed jars, and please don't rob me vibes that, let's be honest, rarely worked. Middle-class families might dig a modest shaft in the desert, line it with bricks, and hope for a quiet eternity. The poor, shallow graves outside the city, sometimes marked with a stone, sometimes not, wrapped in old linens, maybe a reed mat. If someone cared enough, they'd leave a bowl of food, a few copper tools, a favorite amulet. And even that was a big deal, because no matter your class, everyone wanted the same thing, to be buried with honor, with ritual, with identity intact. Otherwise, your soul might get lost, might not recognize its body, might fail to get through the checkpoints of the afterlife. That's not superstition, that's logistics. Egypt had an entire system of post-death protocols, and being buried badly was like flunking every step. Take this horrifying scenario. You die during a flood, the Nile reclaims your body, no burial, no rites, your family can't retrieve you. Boom, spiritual limbo. Or maybe you die during war and your remains are left on the battlefield, stripped, forgotten. That's not just tragic, it's terrifying. Because in Egyptian belief, an unburied body meant a disconnected soul, a ghost, a restless wraith with no coordinates. This is why even criminals, if their families had influence, tried to recover the body. Why enemies were sometimes cursed, not just in life, but in death logistics. May you never be buried, may your tomb never be built, may your name be lost. That was the nuclear insult. So families fought hard to do it right. On the day of the funeral, the procession began at sunrise. Mourners wore linen, ashes, and practiced grief. Professional weepers were hired because in Egypt, loud sadness was a sign of respect. The louder the wail, the more important the dead. Think of it like Yelp reviews, but in the form of dramatic sobbing. The body, now mummified and perfumed to within an inch of recognition, was placed on a sled. Yes, a sled. Pulled across sand by oxen or men or both, depending on your budget. At the front of the line, priests recited spells. At the back, family members wailed and tossed sand on their heads. Somewhere in the middle, someone always tripped. The destination, the tomb. There, more rituals unfolded. The opening of the mouth ceremony was performed, a symbolic act where the priest touched the mummy's lips with spatules so the deceased could speak, eat, and breathe in the next life. Yes, even speech required a magical permission slip, because apparently, nothing in the afterlife was automatic. Finally, the body was placed inside the tomb. Offerings were arranged, prayers whispered, names repeated again and again so the soul would remember who it was. And then, the door was sealed, for good. Unless, of course, someone robbed it 3 weeks later. But we'll ignore that for now. Here's the most fascinating part. Even false tombs existed. That's right, decoys. Some elites, afraid of being robbed or erased, built multiple tombs. One public, one secret. Maybe a dummy coffin, maybe inscriptions with fake names. You'd think it's overkill, but remember, this was about spiritual survival. If confusing a tomb robber meant keeping your soul intact, you did it. The afterlife didn't reward honesty, it rewarded cunning. And so burial became not just a ritual, but a strategy, a game of spiritual chess with death as the opponent. Get it right and you'd rest forever. Get it wrong, and you might spend eternity yelling directions to a ghost that lost its map. Which is why even today we marvel not just at the beauty of Egyptian tombs, but at the desperation baked into every layer of stone, every amulet, every jar. Because underneath it all wasn't just religion, it was fear, hope, and a fierce refusal to be forgotten. It's easy to look at ancient Egypt and think of grand monuments, gold-covered kings, and a level of architectural flex that still makes modern builders cry. But behind the towering obelisks and precision-cut pyramids was a simpler, grittier truth. Ordinary people built this place, and they suffered for it. Let's spend some time with them now. Meet the laborers, the backbone of Egypt. Not the pharaohs, not the gods, but the sun-scorched, dust-covered humans who hauled, chiseled, and stacked their way into immortality they were never promised. These weren't slaves in the Hollywood sense. Most of them were paid workers. But paid is a flexible term when your salary is grain, beer, and maybe we won't hit you today. You live in a worker village, perhaps Deir el Medina if you're one of the lucky artisans trusted with royal tombs. Your house is better built than most. Stone walls, a roof that doesn't cave in during a strong breeze. Still small, still cramped, but it's considered an upgrade, like going from a soggy tent to a budget motel. Your day starts early. You head out to the Valley of the Kings, not to admire the view, but to carve yet another square meter of someone else's forever home. You're part of a crew, painters, stonecutters, plasterers, scribes, the guys who make the underworld look fabulous. But let's not romanticize it. The tools are primitive, copper chisels that blunt after an hour. They had wooden mallets that split on a bad swing, dust so thick it becomes part of your lunch, and the hours, brutal. This isn't punch in at 9, sip some coffee work. This is carve till your hands go numb, then keep carving. Even when you're painting, especially when you're painting, the conditions are rough. Ever try to make a falcon-headed god look majestic by torchlight? The air is thick with smoke, your back is arched in angles the human body never agreed to, and the plaster cracks if someone sneezes too close. And yet, the work is sacred. You're not just decorating walls, you're building eternity. The spells you etch, the prayers you paint, they are literal maps for the dead. Without them, even a pharaoh could get lost in the afterlife. No one wants their king spending eternity asking for directions from a crocodile. Mistakes aren't taken lightly. There's no oops when you accidentally reverse a hieroglyph and turn peaceful rest into vengeful goat. Supervisors are everywhere, so are priests. And if something really goes wrong, the tomb might get sealed up early. Your wages docked, your name not added to the roster. And in Egypt, if your name isn't remembered, your soul doesn't stick around. So you keep working. And when it's finally time to head back to the village, you're caked in lime dust, bent like a reed, and hoping someone left dinner over a fire. But guess what? The fire's out. Your kid's sick. The bread's gone hard, and someone's goat is chewing your laundry again. The ancient Egyptian work-life balance was, let's call it aspirational. If you complain, carefully. Egypt has informants. Snitches aren't just a modern plague. Say the wrong thing about the foreman and you might find yourself reassigned to hauling bricks in the midday sun. Or worse, reported to temple officials, and they don't joke. Their punishments come with ceremony and flair. You'll wish they just yelled at you. On occasion, things go so badly that workers strike. That's right, ancient Egypt gave us one of the first recorded labor strikes in history. When rations weren't delivered, workers at Deir el-Medina dropped their tools, marched to the temple, and demanded food. Politely, of course. This is Egypt, not a riot. They got results, eventually. But the message was clear. Even in a society obsessed with order, workers had limits. Still, day after day, generation after generation, they returned to work. Building tombs for kings who'd never say thank you. Painting stars on ceilings no one alive would see. Placing spells in secret compartments, all to help a soul that wasn't theirs. And why? Because it meant something. To be part of something lasting. To know that while your name might fade, your hand helped shape eternity. That maybe if the gods were kind, your children would live easier. That in 1,000 years, someone might walk into a dark tomb, see a painted god, and wonder, who did this? It was you, covered in dust, hungry, silent, but present, and somehow, despite it all, still believing. Now, let's shift the focus from dust-covered laborers to the squeaky clean elite, specifically the priests. The smooth-skinned, lotus-scented, judgmental crew that ran ancient Egypt's temples like divine corporations. You know the type. Always in spotless linen, always looking like they just emerged from a cleansing spa, because they did. Daily, twice. Being a priest in ancient Egypt wasn't just about rituals. It was a full-time, meticulously scheduled, surprisingly political job. These weren't humble monks meditating in silence. Priests were administrators, landowners, educators, astronomers, and sometimes kingmakers, and they were everywhere. Temples weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic powerhouses. Some owned land, livestock, granaries, bakeries, breweries, ships, you name it. Temples were the Walmarts of the Nile, and the priests? They managed it all, with incense in one hand and a ledger in the other. Let's say you're a mid-level priest in Thebes. You wake before sunrise, perform your ritual purification, shaving, bathing, no body hair allowed because nothing says holy like zero fuzz. You anoint yourself with oil, dress in crisp linen, and avoid anything impure, including fish, garlic, and your wife. For real. Many priests had to remain celibate during service periods. Being holy meant being lonely. You head to the temple, an architectural marvel bigger than anything else in town. Columns carved like lotus blossoms, walls etched with stories of gods smiting chaos, giant statues that stare into your soul as if to say, try not to mess this up. Your first job? Wake up the god. Yes, literally. Each temple housed a statue of the deity it honored, Amun, Ra, Horus, take your pick. And every morning, a priest had to go in, pull back the curtain, and gently wake the god's essence. It's like being a cosmic butler. You greet the statue, recite prayers, and present breakfast, usually bread, beer, meat, and fruit. The god doesn't eat it, presumably, so once the ritual ends, the food is redistributed to temple staff. That's right, holy leftovers. Sacred brunch. Then comes the cleansing, dressing, and adorning of the statue. Perfume? Check. Fresh linens? Check. Jewelry? Absolutely. You're not just maintaining a sculpture, you're helping the divine look red carpet ready. The idea was, keep the god comfortable and they'll keep the cosmos running smoothly. Offend them and, well, locusts, or floods, or very aggressive hippos. Priests rotated in and out of service, some only worked part of the year. When off duty, they went home, possibly resumed normal lives, maybe even hugged their spouses. But during service, they had to be spotless, mind, body, spirit. No sneezing in the sanctuary, no flatulence in front of Osiris. One wrong move, and boom, ritual failure. And trust me, rituals were everywhere. There were ceremonies for everything: birth, death, planting season, flood season, toothaches, you name it. Egypt had a god for it, and that god had an annual event. Some festivals were public, like the Opet festival in Thebes, where the god Amun's statue was paraded down the Nile in a golden bark while the people partied like it was 1299 BCE. Others were secret, hidden inside sanctuaries where only the highest-ranking priests could enter. But don't be fooled. This wasn't all incense and prayer. Priests had power, real, tangible political power. Some temple complexes were so wealthy they rivaled the state. In later periods, there were moments when priests wielded more influence than the pharaoh. They controlled land, collected taxes, and stored grain, essentially running mini-kingdoms within the kingdom. And with power comes drama. Rivalries brewed between temples. The cult of Amun might throw shade at the cult of Ra. High priests could challenge royal decisions. And don't even get started on Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to shut down all the temples and make Egypt monotheistic. Spoiler, it didn't go well. The priesthood was furious. After his death, they erased his name from monuments like a celestial nope. Despite all this grandeur, there was one thing priests couldn't do: keep themselves immortal. Even the most powerful priests died. Their mummified remains, buried in beautifully painted coffins filled with spells and amulets, eventually crumbled, just like everyone else's. The temples, so carefully maintained, fell to ruin. The gods they served faded into obscurity, buried beneath shifting sands. But for a time, they were the voice of the divine, the interpreters of fate, the keepers of the rituals that held the universe together with reed pens and sacred oil. And every time you light a candle or burn incense or say a quiet prayer, even if you don't believe in crocodile-headed deities, you're echoing something they started. So maybe in some dusty cosmic ledger, their names are still being remembered. Now, let's talk about love, or at least the ancient Egyptian version of it, which frankly sounds like a mix between intense poetry and coordinated household survival. Because while pharaohs were marrying their sisters for divine bloodline reasons, let's not unpack that today, the average Egyptian was just trying to find someone who could grind grain, raise children, and maybe not snore like a dying ibex. Marriage in ancient Egypt wasn't about romantic gestures. There were no diamond rings, no candlelit dinners along the Nile, and absolutely no writing, "I love you" in hieroglyphs on the sand. But that doesn't mean they didn't love. They just had a different user manual. First off, there was no official marriage ceremony, no state registry, no big feast with matching gold napkins. If two people decided they were living together as husband and wife, congrats, you're married. All it took was mutual agreement and, in many cases, an informal contract outlining what happened if things went badly. These divorce clauses were often very specific. For example, if he leaves her without reason, he shall give her 1.5 sacks of barley, 1 donkey, and 2 tunics. Romantic? No. Practical? Extremely. Egypt understood that love was beautiful, but linen was expensive. Once married, roles were defined, but not as rigid as you might expect. Yes, men usually worked outside, farming, trading, building. But women weren't just at home brushing wigs. They could own land, manage businesses, and even take legal action. Some women were scribes, some were priestesses, and if you messed with one, she could haul you to court and demand compensation in front of male judges who would actually listen. At home, women often ran the household, and by ran, we mean managed logistics like a full-time COO. Food preparation, linen weaving, child rearing, budgeting. If ancient homes had post-it notes, they'd all be hers. And don't forget, these homes didn't have sinks, soap, or grocery stores. Everything took work. Feeding a family involved grinding flour by hand, baking in clay ovens, and trying not to inhale ash between bites. And still, there was affection. Real, recorded affection. We found love poems scratched on ostraka, broken pottery shards that rival any modern text message. One man wrote, "She has no rival. Just by walking past, she makes me feel like I've been drinking beer." Another compared his lover's voice to geese honking in harmony. Okay, maybe not Shakespeare, but still, heartfelt honking counts. Sex, not taboo, not hidden. Fertility was a divine blessing, and the human body, especially the reproductive parts, was celebrated in art, amulets, and statues with zero censorship. Gods like Hathor and Bez were patrons of love, birth, and bawdy jokes. And let's just say, those statues didn't leave much to the imagination. Children were the goal, lots of them, not just because people liked big families, but because life was fragile. High infant mortality, disease, and accidents meant you needed a wide margin if you wanted even half your children to survive. And raising them? No joke. Children were cherished, protected, sometimes even tattooed with symbols to ward off evil spirits. If a child got sick, prayers were offered, spells recited, and if that didn't work, crocodile dung poultices. Yep, that's love. But love wasn't always permanent. Divorce was legal, accessible, and compared to some modern systems, surprisingly fair. A woman could leave her husband, reclaim her dowry, and go back to her family or start again. No scarlet letters, no exile, just papyrus paperwork and a firm handshake. Widowhood was also common. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40. If your spouse died, mourning rituals kicked in. Women shaved their heads, wore special garments, and sometimes joined a temple to serve the gods in honor of the deceased. Others remarried. Love and practicality were never far apart in Egypt. Even in death, couples stayed together, literally. Tombs often featured images of husband and wife holding hands, seated together in the afterlife, surrounded by their children. One famous statue shows a couple mid-embrace, eyes wide, as if forever surprised to still like each other after all that time. Because love in ancient Egypt wasn't a grand gesture. It was surviving side by side, grinding grain, fetching water, raising loud, dusty kids in homes with no doors, and somehow after all that, still wanting to lie next to each other under a linen sheet and dream of paradise. That's not just romantic, that's heroic. Let's talk fashion, because while the rest of the ancient world was draping itself in wool and pretending it was comfortable, Egypt said, "No thanks, we'll take linen, light colors, and zero shame." And honestly, they nailed it. The Egyptian wardrobe was the ancient version of desert core. Minimal, breathable, and designed for one purpose, not dying of heat stroke. This wasn't a land of cold winters and cozy cloaks. This was sun, sand, and sweat every single day. And your outfit had to reflect that, or else you'd reflect the sun into your own doom. Men wore kilts, sometimes called shendit, just a single piece of linen wrapped around the hips and tied at the waist. Think of it as the original high-efficiency garment. One size fits all, doubles as a towel, minimal folding, and with the right wind gust, a surprisingly breezy experience. Women's fashion? Linen dresses, often sleeveless or with narrow straps. Elegant, simple, and form-fitting, because when you live next to the Nile and bathe in buckets, you might as well look good doing it. Wealthier women added pleats, jewelry, and perfume. Poorer women still kept it clean and practical. No one had time for corsets or buttons. The Egyptians invented eyeliner, not zippers. Now let's address the elephant in the room: nudity. Yes, it happened, especially for children who often ran around stark naked until puberty. Nobody blinked. No scandal, just sweaty, giggling chaos. Adults, too, occasionally ditched garments during work. If you were a farmer knee-deep in mud, wearing a full outfit was just asking to be stewed alive. But even when fully dressed, you didn't stop there. Jewelry was essential: rings, bracelets, amulets, earrings. If it sparkled, it had purpose. Gold was popular, of course, but so were faience, a glazed ceramic that looked like turquoise, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. These weren't just accessories, they were protections. Wearing a scarab bracelet wasn't about fashion, it was about telling death. Not today. Hair? Oh, they had thoughts about hair. Most people shaved it off, all of it, men, women, children. Bald. Why? Because lice, and because heat. Wigs were the answer. Wigs were art. You had your daily wig, your festival wig, maybe even a flirty side bang wig. Crafted from human hair, sheep wool, or plant fibers, wigs were styled, oiled, and perfumed. A good wig could land you a date, or at least avoid being mistaken for a sick person. For those who kept their hairstyles varied: Braids, curls, shaved sides, even the iconic side lock of youth, a single braid left on a child's shaved head symbolizing their age and status, like a spiritual bowl cut but with deeper meaning. Makeup? Oh, let's go there. Egyptians didn't just invent it, they perfected it. Men and women wore kohl eyeliner, made from ground minerals mixed with oil or animal fat. Applied with a stick, it stretched dramatically from the eyes, making everyone look part deity, part runway model. But it wasn't just about looks, it protected eyes from glare and infection. Basically, ancient sunscreen with style. Green malachite was used on eyelids, red ochre for cheeks and lips. Henna dyed fingertips, and everyone smelled like something divine, thanks to myrrh, frankincense, and perfumed cones worn on the head that melted slowly throughout the day. Imagine sweating, but it smells like flowers. Shoes? Optional. Most people went barefoot, especially indoors. Sandals made from papyrus or leather were reserved for outside, and even then, only for special trips or higher classes. Walking barefoot on scorched earth was considered character building, or just inescapable. The rich, of course, took fashion to theatrical levels. They had pleated robes that fanned like accordion paper, beaded capes that shimmered in sunlight, and gold-plated collars that required serious neck strength. The more powerful you were, the heavier your jewelry. Pharaohs wore leopard skin sashes and crowns that looked like cosplay accessories, because why rule if you can't glow? And everything had meaning. Colors weren't random. White was purity. Red could be power or danger. Blue and green meant rebirth and protection. Black was fertility. Yes, really, it symbolized the rich silt of the Nile. Your outfit wasn't just chosen for comfort. It was coded messaging. Your linen said, "It's hot," but your amulet screamed, "I dare death to mess with me." Even after death, fashion mattered. Mummies were buried with outfits for the afterlife, jewelry, wigs, sandals, all carefully packed like a divine carry-on. You didn't want to show up in paradise underdressed. That was social suicide. Some pharaohs were buried with dozens of sandals because apparently the field of reeds had a demanding dress code, and somehow across 3,000 years, it worked. Egyptian style endured, adapted, inspired. Today, we still paint our eyes with kohl, wear linen on hot days, and dream of jewelry that can protect our souls. We haven't left it behind. We've just updated the accessories. So next time you swipe on eyeliner, slip into a tunic, or ditch your shoes at the door, just know, you're carrying on a tradition that began in the shadow of the pyramids. Let's talk about fashion, because while the rest of the ancient world was draping itself in wool and pretending it was comfortable, Egypt said, "No thanks, we'll take linen, light colors, and zero shame." And honestly, they nailed it. The Egyptian wardrobe was the ancient version of desert core, minimal, breathable, and designed for one purpose, not dying of heat stroke. This wasn't a land of cold winters and cozy cloaks. This was sun, sand, and sweat every single day. And your outfit had to reflect that, or else you'd reflect the sun into your own doom. Men wore kilts, sometimes called shendit, just a single piece of linen wrapped around the hips and tied at the waist. Think of it as the original high-efficiency garment. One size fits all, doubles as a towel, minimal folding, and with the right wind gust, a surprisingly breezy experience. Women's fashion, linen dresses, often sleeveless or with narrow straps, elegant, simple, and form-fitting, because when you live next to the Nile and bathe in buckets, you might as well look good doing it. Wealthier women added pleats, jewelry, and perfume. Poorer women still kept it clean and practical. No one had time for corsets or buttons. The Egyptians invented eyeliner, not zippers. Now let's address the elephant in the room, nudity. Yes, it happened, especially for children who often ran around stark naked until puberty. Nobody blinked. No scandal. Just sweaty, giggling chaos. Adults, too, occasionally ditched garments during work. If you were a farmer knee-deep in mud, wearing a full outfit was just asking to be stewed alive. But even when fully dressed, you didn't stop there. Jewelry was essential. Rings, bracelets, amulets, earrings. If it sparkled, it had purpose. Gold was popular, of course, but so were faience, a glazed ceramic that looked like turquoise, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. These weren't just accessories, they were protections. Wearing a scarab bracelet wasn't about fashion, it was about telling death, not today. Hair? Oh, they had thoughts about hair. Most people shaved it off, all of it. Men, women, children, bald. Why? Because lice, and because heat. Wigs were the answer. Wigs were art. You had your daily wig, your festival wig, maybe even a flirty sidebang wig. Crafted from human hair, sheep wool, or plant fibers, wigs were styled, oiled, and perfumed. A good wig could land you a date, or at least avoid being mistaken for a sick person. For those who kept their hair, styles varied. Braids, curls, shaved sides, even the iconic side lock of youth, a single braid left on a child's shaved head, symbolizing their age and status. Like a spiritual bowl cut, but with deeper meaning. Makeup? Oh, let's go there. Egyptians didn't just invent it, they perfected it. Men and women wore kohl eyeliner, made from ground minerals mixed with oil or animal fat. Applied with a stick, it stretched dramatically from the eyes, making everyone look part deity, part runway model. But it wasn't just about looks, it protected eyes from glare and infection. Basically, ancient sunscreen with style. Green malachite was used on eyelids, red ochre for cheeks and lips, henna dyed fingertips, and everyone smelled like something divine, thanks to myrrh, frankincense, and perfumed cones worn on the head that melted slowly throughout the day. Imagine sweating, but it smells like flowers. Shoes? Optional. Most people went barefoot, especially indoors. Sandals made from papyrus or leather were reserved for outside, and even then, only for special trips or higher classes. Walking barefoot on scorched earth was considered character building, or just inescapable. The rich, of course, took fashion to theatrical levels. They had pleated robes that fanned like accordion paper, beaded capes that shimmered in sunlight, and gold-plated collars that required serious neck strength. The more powerful you were, the heavier your jewelry. Pharaohs wore leopard skin sashes and crowns that looked like cosplay accessories because why rule if you can't glow? And everything had meaning. Colors weren't random. White was purity. Red could be power or danger. Blue and green meant rebirth and protection. Black was fertility. Yes, really, it symbolized the rich silt of the Nile. Your outfit wasn't just chosen for comfort, it was coded messaging. Your linen said, "It's hot," but your amulet screamed, "I dare death to mess with me." Even after death, fashion mattered. Mummies were buried with outfits for the afterlife. Jewelry, wigs, sandals, all carefully packed like a divine carry-on. You didn't want to show up in paradise underdressed. That was social suicide. Some pharaohs were buried with dozens of sandals because apparently the field of reeds had a demanding dress code. And somehow across 3,000 years, it worked. Egyptian style endured, adapted, inspired. Today, we still paint our eyes with kohl, wear linen on hot days, and dream of jewelry that can protect our souls. We haven't left it behind, we've just updated the accessories. So next time you swipe on eyeliner, slip into a tunic, or ditch your shoes at the door, just know, you're carrying on a tradition that began in the shadow of the pyramids. You've seen the temples, you've seen the tombs, but now it's time to talk about something less shiny, more slippery. Healthcare in ancient Egypt. Because while their architecture was immortal, their immune systems, not so much. Let's begin with the baseline. You're sick. Maybe it's the flu, maybe it's food poisoning, maybe it's a curse. The line between all three was often blurry. First stop, the healer. Egypt had doctors, some of the earliest recorded in history. They were respected, trained, and even specialized. You might go to a physician of the belly or a doctor of the eyes. There were manuals, papyri filled with treatments and step-by-step guides. If patient coughs up blood, try crushed acacia and honey. If patient still coughs up blood, maybe stop promising eternal life. But let's not pretend this was a sanitized clinic with soft music and inspirational posters. Your exam room was probably someone's courtyard. Your prescription? A paste made of goose fat, natron, and something that smells like feet. And your prognosis? Hope. Because medicine here was half science, half magic, literally. Every ailment had a physical explanation, worms, infection, bad water, but also a spiritual one. A cold might be caused by evil spirits. A headache? Maybe you angered a god. So treatment involved both herbs and spells, bandages and amulets, a poultice for the wound, and a chant to tell demons, please exit through the nearest metaphysical door. Some of the ingredients worked. Really. Honey is antibacterial. Garlic fights infection. Willow bark reduces pain. It's basically ancient aspirin. But others, let's just say, the placebo effect was working overtime. For example, if you had a toothache, and you would, because dental hygiene was tragic, you might be prescribed ground mouse mixed with beer. Or worse, you might just lose the tooth entirely. Egyptian bread was full of sand. Yes, sand. The grinding stones used to process grain added grit, and grit wears down teeth faster than regret wears down ambition. Most adults had severe dental issues, abscesses, worn enamel, rot. Some mummies were found with jaws so infected it's a miracle they ever slept, and the cure? Usually removal. With no anesthesia, no warning, just bite this stick and try not to remember it in the afterlife. If you survived that, congratulations. Now let's look at your gut. Parasites were common. Flatworms, roundworms, things with names that sound like low-budget horror movies. Drinking Nile water was a gamble, and unless you were boiling it or straining it through a cloth, and who had time for that, chances were good you'd get an internal guest, maybe two. But don't worry, there were treatments. Most involved purging, either with herbs or oils or medicinal beer. Egyptian beer wasn't just for getting tipsy. It was considered a daily health drink, packed with nutrients, low in alcohol, thick enough to stand a spoon in. Also probably full of bacteria, but let's not ruin the fantasy. Infections? Treated with honey, resin, and prayers. Broken bones? Set with splints made of wood or bark. Eye diseases, extremely common, got special attention. After all, the eye was sacred, just a symbol. It was practically a medical logo. Ointments were applied. Salves mixed. If all else failed, try not to rub it. And yet, despite all these efforts, people died a lot. Infant mortality was high. Women died in childbirth. Fevers turned deadly in a blink. There were no antibiotics, no vaccines, and yet somehow they lived. Not always long, not always well, but with faith in the gods, in the healers, in the strange-smelling concoction that might be the only thing between you and a one-way trip to the field of reeds. And death? That wasn't failure. It was transition. A good death was peaceful, prepared, and preferably not too messy. Dying with your amulets in place? Ideal. Dying cursed by your neighbor's goat? Less so. But perhaps the most miraculous thing wasn't that they survived, it's that they documented it. Thousands of years later, we know their treatments, their fears, their hopes, because someone took the time to write it down. On papyrus, with a reed pen, probably while coughing. So next time you grumble about waiting 2 hours for urgent care, just remember, you could be chewing mouse paste and praying to Sekhmet. Perspective, people. Let's take a moment to breathe. Not the heavily perfumed incense of a temple or the dust-clogged air of a stone quarry, but the humid, ever-present air of the Nile Delta. Because if there's one thing that shaped Egypt more than pharaohs or gods, it was the Nile River. A glorified ribbon of muddy water? Maybe. But to ancient Egyptians, it was everything. Road, refrigerator, calendar, and life giver. Start your day by the water. The Nile is more than scenery. It's clockwork. Every year, like a divine alarm, it floods on cue. It spills over its banks, spreads silt, and resets the soil like nature's own fertilizer subscription. Without this annual event, Egypt is just sand and wishful thinking. So what do people do when the river rises? They celebrate. The flood season isn't a disaster, it's a blessing. Farmers take a break, tools are downed, temples perform rituals to thank the gods, especially Hapi, the god of the inundation. He's always depicted with blue skin, a belly, and a serious dad bod energy. Because in Egypt, fertility gods were not six-pack models. They were soft and reliable, like wet loaves of bread. Once the water recedes, the real work begins. The fields are ready. Farmers dig channels, guide the water, and begin sowing seeds. Wheat, barley, flax, your staples. Food doesn't grow on trees here. It grows from organized labor and back pain. But it works. The Nile feeds everyone. It's like ancient Amazon Prime, but slower and more sacred. And the river isn't just for farming. It's your main transportation system. Boats, rafts, barges. It's the superhighway of the ancient world. Need to send a shipment of stone to a pyramid site? Nile. Deliver grain to a starving town? Nile. Move a massive obelisk carved from one piece of granite that weighs more than your entire village? Again, Nile. But travel wasn't always relaxing. The sun beats down, boats creak, crocodiles lurk. Papyrus skiffs aren't exactly built for comfort. And if you're rowing for hours, say goodbye to arm strength. You're now a walking tricep with heat rash. Still, everyone uses the river. Fishermen cast nets, women wash clothes, children splash around until someone yells about crocodiles again. There's commerce, chatter, singing, and shouting. It's a living, flowing city center. And the Nile brings not just water, but meaning. It flows south to north against what most people expect. So Egyptians orient their world differently. Upper Egypt is south, Lower Egypt is north. Directions are based on the Nile's flow. Your left hand points west, the land of the dead. Your right hand points east, the land of the living. Even in death, geography matters. Religiously, the Nile was sacred. It was the vein of Osiris, the river through which life and resurrection flowed. Every temple faced it. Every city owed it thanks. Priests drew holy water from it, and if you died with enough favor, your tomb might even overlook it, because what better view is there than the river that kept you alive? But the Nile wasn't always kind. Sometimes the floods were weak, crops failed, hunger spread, prices soared, people panicked. The pharaoh, who was supposed to guarantee divine order, took the blame. Sometimes priests had to perform rituals to wake up the Nile. Sometimes people whispered that the gods were angry, and when floods were too strong, villages vanished, fields drowned. The blessing became a curse. Yet somehow through all this, people adapted. They kept planting, kept hoping, because what choice did they have? The desert wasn't going to start farming itself, so every day people returned to the banks to wash, to fish, to float, to live. They sang songs to it, composed hymns. O Nile, who comes from the earth, who brings life to all lands. And they meant it. Because the Nile wasn't just a river, it was their heartbeat. And even now, if you stand on its banks and close your eyes, you can almost hear the oars, the market cries, the splash of ancient children who should absolutely not be swimming that close to a hippo. Some things never change. By now, we've seen the temples, we've trudged through tombs, and we've admired the linen fashion choices. But what about the kids? What was it like to grow up in ancient Egypt without screen time, bubble baths, or anyone yelling, "Don't run with that"? Welcome to childhood on the Nile. Spoiler, it's equal parts adorable and mildly terrifying. Let's start at the beginning. Birth. You're born at home, most likely in a modest mud brick room, maybe even outside if the weather's cooperating. Midwives guide the process, often with help from family women. No hospitals, no epidurals, just prayers, oils, and a whole lot of shouting. But if you make it out alive, and not everyone did, you're instantly a small miracle. Because infant mortality rates were brutal. The Nile was generous, but not hygienic. And between parasites, malnutrition, and wild animals, the first few years were a survival game. That said, childhood wasn't all gloom. Once you made it past toddler stage, your days were blissfully barefoot. Clothes? Optional. Supervision? Loose. You ran in packs with other kids, exploring alleys, riverbanks, and occasionally wandering into crocodile zones, which somehow wasn't a daily tragedy. Toys existed, real ones. Dolls made of wood, string, and clay, spinning tops, balls, games with stones that were like ancient marbles, and pets. Cats were obvious favorites, sacred Fluffy and excellent mouse hunters. But kids also kept monkeys, birds, and even baby crocodiles. Yes, because childhood wasn't dangerous enough already. Education depended on status. If your parents were farmers, you'd learn to farm. If they were artisans, you'd apprentice. But if you were lucky, really lucky, you might go to school. Not a chalkboard and backpack kind of school, but a scribe's house. Think scrolls, ink, reed pens, and absolutely no recess. Learning to read and write was no joke. Hieroglyphs are beautiful, yes, but they're also insanely complex. Hundreds of symbols, each with multiple meanings. Writing was a sacred art, and scribes were elite. If you were training to be one, you studied day and night, copying texts until your wrist went numb. Fun fact, one student's complaint on an ostrakhan reads, "The teacher beat me when I didn't write fast enough." So, ancient school wasn't exactly Montessori. Girls rarely became scribes, but they weren't sidelined. They learned to manage households, prepare food, weave linen, and maybe even perform rituals if born into priestly families. Power wasn't strictly male, it was just differently distributed. And women could, in rare but documented cases, climb very high. Some even ruled as pharaoh. But back to the kids. When not playing or learning, they helped. You milked goats, hauled water, fetched firewood, stirred pots. Life was participatory. No one got to say, "Not my chore." And if you complained, ancient parents had zero patience. Obedience was expected. Whining was met with a look that could cut through stone. Yet affection was real. Art shows parents holding children, ruffling their hair, even cuddling. They told stories, sang lullabies, gave nicknames like Little Lotus or My Papyrus Leaf. Discipline existed, but love did too. And in a world where death was never far, love came fast and loud. When puberty hit, things changed fast. Boys were expected to train in trades or prepare for adult duties. Girls, often married by their early teens, sometimes younger. That sounds shocking now, but in a world where you were middle-aged by 30, everything ran on fast forward. Ceremonies marked transitions. A girl might receive her first amulet. A boy might shave his sidelock of youth. Suddenly, you weren't a kid anymore. You were part of the machine, expected to marry, work, worship, and contribute. The playtime ended. The stakes got real. Still, echoes of childhood followed them. Adults carried charms shaped like toys. They remembered games. Some never forgot their first doll, buried with them in tombs like a comfort object for the next world. Because Egypt believed childhood didn't just vanish. It followed you, protected you, reminded you who you were before the work, the heat, the burden of survival. So if you ever find a clay hippo with one broken ear or a doll shaped like a lioness buried next to a grown woman, that's not just decoration. That's history's whisper of a child who once laughed by the Nile, barefoot and fearless. All right, let's get real about something we've been dancing around: food. Because while Egyptian tombs were packed with gold, magic, and awkwardly positioned mummies, what most people were really hoping for in the afterlife was a decent meal. So, what did people eat in ancient Egypt? Short answer, bread and beer. Long answer, bread and beer, every day, forever, until your molars surrender and your liver sends a polite goodbye note. Let's start with bread. It was the staple, the foundation, the edible brick of Egyptian existence. But this wasn't fluffy bakery-style sourdough. No, this was dense, dark, and packed with grit. Literally. The grain was ground with stone tools, which meant your daily loaf came with a side of sand. Chewing it was an act of courage. Swallowing it, a gamble. Why so gritty? Because the grinding stones shed particles into the flour. The result, slow dental doom. Most adult skulls show worn teeth, abscesses, and enough dental trauma to make modern dentists weep. Still, everyone ate it, every day. The second great staple? Beer. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't your hoppy IPA or chilled lager. Egyptian beer was more like a hearty porridge you drank with a straw. Made from partially baked bread mixed with water and fermented in jars, it was thick, sour, and oddly nutritious. Think of it as ancient protein shake, but chunkier and more prone to exploding in the sun. Even kids drank beer. It was safer than Nile water, full of calories, and kept the whole family just buzzed enough to ignore the 45-degree heat and the constant smell of goat. Now let's add some variety. The average diet included onions, garlic, leeks, lentils, chickpeas, and cucumbers. If you're sensing a theme, yes, Egyptians were basically the first Mediterranean vegans. Meat was rare for the poor, but they still got protein from beans and pulses. Fruits, dates, figs, grapes, occasionally sycamore fruit, which sounds exotic but probably tasted like regret. Richer families had melons and pomegranates, luxuries imported or grown in well-tended gardens. Fish from the Nile was common, but eating it raw was risky, hello parasites, so it was usually dried or salted. If you were lucky enough to afford meat, you'd get goat, duck, goose, or on high holidays, a slab of beef. Cows were sacred and expensive. Eating one was like roasting your god's pet and saying thanks with your mouth full. Spices were limited. Salt, coriander, cumin, and a few herbs like dill and mint. No chili, no sugar, no chocolate, no coffee, no sadness, apparently, because Egyptians still smiled in their tomb paintings despite the clear lack of espresso. Sweeteners? Mostly honey, and it was rare. Dates were the main way to add sugar to anything. A dessert might be a ball of dates mashed with nuts and fat. Delicious, probably. Healthy? Questionable. Sticky? Oh yes. Your afterlife dentist will see you now. Cooking was done over open fires or clay ovens. Pots were clay. Pans were rare. If you needed something boiled, stewed, or baked, you did it low and slow, and tried not to ignite your thatch roof in the process. And yet, despite the limitations, meals were a big deal. Families gathered to eat. Workers paused their day for communal bread and beer breaks. Festivals featured feasts. Offerings to the dead always included food. Because what's the point of eternal life if there's no snack table? The wealthy took it further. Banquets were lavish. Guests reclined on mats while servants brought in dish after dish. Entertainment included music, dancers, and wine. Real grape wine, imported and expensive. Drinking games were played. Things got rowdy. Ancient party scenes painted on tomb walls show women clapping, men singing, and a few guests looking like they've just lost their sandals and their dignity. And what about the gods? They got food too. Every day, temples offered meals to statues. Bread, beer, meat, fruit, all presented as if the divine had a full stomach to fill. The food didn't go to waste. After the ritual, it was redistributed to priests and temple staff. Divine leftovers recycled into sacred lunch. So next time you complain about not knowing what to cook, just remember, the average Egyptian had 2 ingredients, no spices and a stove made of dirt, and they still believed they were dining like kings. Why? Because food wasn't just about flavor. It was survival, celebration, offering, memory. It was the bond between the living and the dead, the sacred and the everyday. The reason you got up in the morning and the reward for making it through another blazing day. Bread and beer. That's it. That's the tweet. Let's talk crime. No, not tomb raiding yet. We'll get to that spicy bit. First, we need to understand how ancient Egypt handled everyday misbehavior. Theft, gossip, workplace drama, basically everything that still happens in your office, minus the spreadsheets and HR department. Egypt wasn't lawless, quite the opposite. It had a legal system, a concept of justice called ma'at, which was less about cold laws and more about cosmic balance. Ma'at was truth, order, fairness. The idea that if everyone behaved justly, the universe would stay in sync and the Nile would continue to flood on time. So if you stole your neighbor's goat, you weren't just a criminal, you were a cosmic disruptor. Congratulations. You've personally angered the gods and maybe delayed planting season. No pressure. But what did law enforcement look like? Let's start with the Medjay, Egypt's version of cops. They started as a Nubian warrior class, but eventually became elite guards and patrol officers. They protected royal property, enforced rules, and sometimes acted as bounty hunters. Think of them as somewhere between mall security and heavily armed detectives. There were no courtrooms like we imagine today. Disputes were handled locally. You'd bring your complaint, written on a scroll or shouted loudly in a public square, to a village official or a priest judge. If the case was big enough, it might reach the vizier, the king's right-hand man. And trials? Fast and informal. No wigs, no gavels, just questions, witnesses, and sometimes, just sometimes, a good old-fashioned beating until you confessed. Yes, confession via persuasion of the stick kind. Punishments varied. For minor crimes, it might be a fine, grain, goods, or labor. For something more serious, public beating, branding, forced labor. And if you really messed up, like treason or temple robbery, then it got biblical. Amputation, exile, execution. Sometimes with extra flair, like drowning or being fed to crocodiles. Ancient Egypt didn't play. But even in this harsh system, there was room for nuance. People could appeal, they could beg for forgiveness. Some sentences were reduced if the accused showed repentance. If a case lacked evidence, it might be dismissed. Egypt wasn't just swinging sticks and calling it a day. Now let's talk about the juiciest legal drama, tomb robbing. Because the thing about filling tombs with gold, perfumes, and priceless treasures is people notice. And when people are poor, hungry, or just really into shiny objects, those sealed stone doors start looking like opportunity. Tomb robbing was epidemic. Pharaohs knew it. That's why later tombs got sneakier. Hidden in cliffs, booby-trapped, guarded by curses, or at least the rumor of curses. But no matter how elaborate the plan, thieves were always one torch and a bad decision away. Some were professionals, organized gangs with lookouts, diggers, transport teams. Others were just desperate villagers who knew someone buried nearby with a nice necklace. And the worst part? Sometimes it was insiders, tomb workers, priests, even guards. The very people paid to protect the dead were selling them out. When caught, robbers face the full fury of the state. There are surviving records of trials where thieves are beaten until they name accomplices. Yes, I took the ring. Yes, Horemheb helped. Yes, we melted the gold and split it 4 ways. It reads like an ancient crime drama, except with more linen. And yet, it kept happening. Because tombs, for all their sacred meaning, were also time capsules of temptation, and Egypt's economy, while powerful, had cracks. Hard times made crime rise. Corruption made justice inconsistent. And when the gods stayed silent, gold spoke loudly. But here's the twist. Despite all the crime, all the punishment, all the stolen sarcophagi and cracked canopic jars, Ma'at endured. The concept of justice, balance, and cosmic order persisted. People still believed in doing right, still feared divine judgment, still whispered that if they lied on earth, their hearts would be weighed in the afterlife and fed to a monster with crocodile jaws and lion paws. And honestly, that's pretty effective motivation. So Next time your neighbor parks too close to your chariot or someone steals your granary key, take a deep breath. Remember Ma'at, restore the balance, and maybe keep your valuables outside the pyramid. All right, we've danced around it long enough. Let's talk tombs, the ultimate flex, the ancient real estate where the motto was, go big or risk eternal wandering. Because in ancient Egypt, dying wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a logistically intense journey. And you better believe your tomb had to be prepped like a royal Airbnb for the afterlife. Let's start with the idea itself. A tomb wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a sacred launch pad. A combination panic room, treasure vault, and cosmic map rolled into one. You weren't just burying a body, you were prepping a soul to navigate the underworld, avoid monsters, pass judgment, and, if all went well, chill forever in paradise. No pressure. And the design? Oh, it mattered. Simple folks got pit burials, wrapped in reed mats, placed in shallow graves. But if you had any wealth, you aimed higher. Rock-cut tombs, mastabas, those big flat-roofed benches of stone. Eventually, full-blown pyramid complexes. These things weren't just shelters for the dead, they were resumes in stone. The inside of a decent tomb was a riot of symbolism. Walls covered in colorful paintings, hieroglyphs chanting prayers, maps of the afterlife showing rivers, gates, and 12 hours of terrifying obstacles. It's like someone combined a GPS, a spellbook, and a comic strip. And at the center, the burial chamber. This was where the sarcophagus went. A coffin inside a coffin inside a coffin, sometimes like a very morbid nesting doll. And around it, grave goods. Furniture, jewelry, makeup, board games, favorite pets, Fluffy, all meant to make the next world feel like home. But not everything was practical. Some tombs had false doors. Carved into the walls, they weren't meant to open. They were portals, spiritual entry points so the deceased could pop in and out between realms. Think of it like ghost Wi-Fi. You didn't see it, but it connected you. Then there were the offerings, loaves of bread, jars of beer, dried meat, incense, even model servants, tiny statues carved to do your chores in the next world. Why sweep your eternal floor when you can bring a 10-centimeter butler? But here's the twist. For all this preparation, tombs were never truly safe. We've already talked tomb robbers. But what about tomb engineers? The original booby trappers. Architects would design false chambers, hidden doors, shafts that led nowhere. Decoy rooms with curses scrawled across them. Whoever disturbs this tomb shall suffer 1,000 deaths. Dramatic? Effective? Debatable. Sometimes the curses were psychological, warning of divine punishment, threats of disease, madness, or the gods tearing your name from the stars. Other times they were physical, traps, collapsing walls, even bees sealed in jars, waiting for light and freedom. Imagine being the robber who just woke up 3,000-year-old angry bees. Instant karma. But even the best defenses couldn't stop decay. Time, mold, earthquakes. And ironically, some of the best preserved tombs weren't the biggest or the richest. They were the forgotten ones, the ones built small, tucked away, spared from attention. And yet, the tradition endured. Tomb building was a national obsession. Entire villages, like Deir el-Medina, existed just to construct royal tombs. Generations of artists, craftsmen, and laborers worked their entire lives on chambers they'd never be buried in. Why? Because helping someone reach eternity was honorable, sacred, a job that might buy you favor with the gods, or at least a decent funeral of your own. Of course, some tombs went next level. Ramses II had an underground maze, Seti Thirsa's tomb was over 100 meters long, and Tutankhamun? The famous boy king had a relatively small tomb, but it was packed to bursting with treasures, gold, chariots, trumpets, and the iconic mask that launched 1,000 documentaries. But even Tut wasn't safe. His tomb was robbed. Twice. Luckily, the robbers got caught early, and the tomb was resealed, leaving us the single most complete royal burial site ever discovered. A stroke of luck for us. A serious facepalm for the ancient guards. So what can we take from all this? Tombs weren't about death, they were about control. Egyptians couldn't escape mortality, but they could design it, plan it, dress it up with hieroglyphs and magic, turn the unknown into something navigable. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. To face the darkness, chisel out a room, paint the walls, stock the shelves, and say, I don't know what comes next, but I'm going in prepared. By now, we've seen enough tombs to know that the Egyptians were very invested in what happened after death. But what actually went down between taking your last breath and becoming a comfy ghost in paradise? Welcome to the afterlife, a place that sounds like a mix between a bureaucratic nightmare and a surreal adventure park starring crocodile demons and talking scales. Let's begin at the end. You've died. Congrats. Someone's crying, someone's panicking, someone else is thinking, do we have enough natron for this? Because the first step is mummification, an elaborate 70-day process that's less funeral and more organic taxidermy with a side of theology. The body is washed, ritually purified, and laid out on a slanted embalming table. A slit is made on the side, and out come the organs: liver, lungs, intestines, stomach, each lovingly cleaned and placed in separate canopic jars. These jars aren't just Tupperware for the soul. They're protected by 4 deities known as the Sons of Horus, each with their own weird head and very specific responsibilities. The heart, usually left in. It's vital for the afterlife trial. The brain, nope. Hooked out through the nose. Because what's logic and memory compared to the weight of your soul? Next comes natron, a natural salt used to dry out the body. You get covered in it, packed with it, and left to marinate like divine beef jerky. 40 days later, you're pulled out, much lighter, very leathery, and frankly, not cute. Then you're stuffed. Linen, resin, onions if you're lucky, oiled, perfumed, wrapped, so much wrapping, and given a face mask. The whole process is spiritual, medical, and dramatic. Chanting, priests, incense. It's part resurrection ritual, part 5-star spa for the deceased. Once you're ready, you're sealed in your coffin, surrounded by grave goods, amulets, food, scrolls, and maybe a favorite board game. Because you're going on a journey, you wake in the duat, the Egyptian underworld. Not fire and brimstone, but a chaotic realm of rivers, caverns, gates, and monster-infested metaphysics. This isn't the Christian hell, this is spiritual boot camp. A maze where you need passwords, spells, and serious luck to survive. Luckily, you brought your Book of the Dead, basically a magical field guide. It contains spells, instructions, and helpful diagrams. Spell 125? That's the big one, because eventually you reach the Hall of Two Truths. Here, you meet Osiris, god of the dead, sitting on a throne with green skin, a white crown, and a vibe that says, I know what you did last summer. Before him stands a giant scale. On one side, your heart. On the other, the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and cosmic balance. The goal? Your heart must be lighter, or at least equal. If it's heavy with sin, guilt, or say, that time you lied about how many goats you owned, you fail. And when you fail, enter Amut, the devourer, a nightmare creature part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, who eats your heart in one gulp, not your body, just your soul. You're erased from existence. No afterlife, no do-over, just gone. But if your heart passes the test, you get to join Osiris in the Field of Reeds, the Egyptian paradise. Think endless sunshine, fertile land, rivers teeming with fish, your favorite people and pets restored, and unlimited beer that probably doesn't taste like bread water. You can farm, but it's fun farming. You can eat, but you never get full. You can stroll under palm trees and admire your perfect unmummified body. It's like a divine, all-inclusive resort, minus the wristbands. But even here, rituals matter. Your name must be remembered. Your tomb must stay intact. If your body decays or your name is erased from history, your soul might wither or wander. That's why Egyptians carved names into stone and left offerings for centuries. Memory kept the afterlife alive. And don't think this was just for pharaohs. Sure, the rich had better tombs and more elaborate funerals, but anyone could reach the afterlife. Farmers, artisans, bakers. As long as you lived with Ma'at, honored the gods, and left behind a heart that wasn't guilt-soaked, you had a shot. In short, the afterlife wasn't a reward. It was a continuation. Life Part 2. And you'd better show up prepared with clean linens, proper spells, and a heart that wouldn't tilt the scale. Because in the end, death wasn't feared, it was managed, controlled, transformed into a journey so detailed, so mythic, that even 3,000 years later, we're still talking about it. Now that's legacy. So, let's shift gears. We've walked with the living, danced with the dead, but now it's time to step into the towering stone bones of Egypt, the temples. Not the cozy kind with incense and light harp music. No, these were god fortresses, massive, carved from cliff and ambition, where every echo seemed to carry the weight of eternity. They weren't just places of worship. They were machines of divinity, political power plants, and occasionally animal daycare centers. Let's start at the entrance, the pylons. Huge stone gateways, often taller than your average apartment building, covered in carvings of pharaohs smiting enemies like they're in a mythological WWE match. It's not subtle. It says, "Welcome to the house of the gods. We're serious. Also, don't mess with us." Pass through and you hit the courtyard, often filled with pillars, statues, and open sky. This was the space for the people, well, the people who were allowed in, which wasn't many, because these temples, mostly off limits. Ordinary folk didn't get past the courtyard. The rest was for priests, pharaohs, and divine staff only. Move inward and the light begins to vanish. You enter hypostyle halls, massive rooms filled with stone columns as thick as tree trunks, and so tall you can't see the tops without squinting. Light filters through tiny vents in the ceiling. It feels like you're walking into a forest built by giants with excellent taste. Deeper still, you reach the sanctuary, a tiny pitch-black room at the temple's heart. Here stood the statue of the god. Not a statue of the god. The god was the statue. It was bathed, fed, dressed, and sung to daily by priests. Not metaphorically, literally. Every morning, a priest would enter, open the shrine, wake the god, present food offerings, burn incense, change the statue's clothing, and sing hymns. The god wasn't just observing. The god was in residence. These rituals weren't optional. If you skipped them, Egypt collapsed. At least that's how people felt. Keeping the gods happy wasn't about personal faith, it was about cosmic stability. If the god didn't get breakfast, the sun might not rise. So yes, they took it seriously. And these temples were not small. Karnak, gigantic. Over 200 acres. It grew over centuries, with each pharaoh adding rooms, statues, and inscriptions like some divine Lego project. Luxor, Edfu, Dendera. Each temple a masterpiece of engineering, symbolism, and sheer architectural ego. They were factories of faith run by huge staffs, not just priests, but scribes, cooks, cleaners, guards, gardeners, dancers, and musicians. Some temples owned land, slaves, and entire villages. The Temple of Amun was basically a religious corporation with spiritual branding. Temples also functioned as libraries and treasuries. Scrolls were stored in special rooms. Gold and precious goods were locked in stone vaults. And because temples were sacred, they often became emergency banks, political archives, and during hard times, literal fortresses. Oh, and let's not forget the animal cults. Yes, some gods had animal forms. Yes, temples raised these animals. And yes, when they died, they were mummified and given funerals more elaborate than some kings. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, bulls, they were living incarnations of divinity. Pet cemetery? Try divine retirement home with embalming privileges. Pilgrims would visit temples on feast days, not to chat with the gods, but to watch the processions. Statues of the gods would be carried out on ornate boats, veiled and shaded, with priests chanting and incense flooding the streets. People lined up to see, hoping for a glimpse, a blessing, or just a good story to tell their grandkids. Because gods didn't just stay put, some traveled. When two temples shared myths, like Isis visiting Osiris, ceremonial visits would happen. Entire fleets of boats, each carrying statues, offerings, and priestly entourages, would sail up or down the Nile. It was religion meets parade. But as powerful as they were, temples weren't eternal. They fell out of use, looted, buried in sand, forgotten, until explorers stumbled across massive walls sticking out of the ground, covered in hieroglyphs, with bats living where gods once sat. Now we tour them, photograph them, reconstruct them in 3D. But once, they were the beating heart of Egypt's divine machinery, sacred stone circuits that kept the universe spinning. And when you walk through one today, under pillars so wide you can't wrap your arms around them, remember, every step echoes with rituals once believed to keep the cosmos alive. We've wandered the tombs, stared up at temples, and tiptoed past croc-snacking demons in the afterlife. But let's be honest. There's one thing everyone secretly wants to talk about when it comes to ancient Egypt. Curses. Yes, the spooky stuff. The reason movie explorers bring torches and everyone dies in mysterious, sand-filled ways before the third act. But how real were these curses? Let's back up. You're in ancient Egypt. You've just spent decades carving a tomb, stuffing it with gold, food, and enough symbolic magic to give a god a headache. Naturally, you want to keep it safe, so what do? You post a warning. Not a beware of dog sign, but something more poetic, like, "He who disturbs this tomb shall be eaten by crocodiles, stung by scorpions, burned in oil, and have his name erased from memory for eternity." Effective. Dramatic. Also, cheap insurance. Because here's the truth. Most curses weren't magic spells, they were psychological warfare, written to scare would-be tomb robbers into turning around and rethinking their career choices. Did they work? Sometimes. But let's not forget, tomb robbery was rampant. Desperate times, hungry people, corrupt officials, a spooky inscription wasn't going to stop a man with nothing to lose and a strong crowbar. And yet, some people did believe. Because curses weren't just words. They were backed by belief in Ma'at, cosmic order. If you violated a tomb, you weren't just stealing, you were disrupting the balance of the universe. And that brought consequences. Still not convinced? Let's talk Tutankhamun, the king of curse lore. When Howard Carter opened his tomb in 1922, it was the archaeological scoop of the century. Gold, walls of art, the boy king, perfectly preserved. But then, the bodies started piling up. Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's sponsor, died suddenly. Mosquito bite, infection, weird coincidence. Others followed, a radiologist, an excavator, a few visitors. Newspapers went wild. Curse of the pharaoh, tomb strikes again. But here's the boring truth. Most of the team lived long, boring lives. Carter himself died at 64, 2 decades later, surrounded by paperwork and museum drama. Not exactly a mummy's revenge. Modern historians point to mold, bacteria, and coincidence. Less spooky, more sneaky. Still, some tombs took it further. The tomb of Kentika Ikeki warned that anyone who disturbed it would lose their earthly titles and be cast into the place of the forgotten. That's serious. Egyptians feared erasure more than death. No name, no afterlife. It was the ultimate existential unfriending. Some tombs included statues with judging eyes, believed to witness crimes. Others had traps, false doors, deep shafts, hidden chambers. You might survive the curse, but could you survive a 30-foot fall onto stone spikes? Probably not. And what about modern tales? Even today, some people feel uneasy near mummies. Museums report strange accidents during Egyptian exhibits, a dropped artifact, a light bulb bursting. Is it the air pressure, the centuries-old fungus, or the echo of a priest's final warning? It doesn't help that Hollywood ran with the idea. From Boris Karloff to Brendan Fraser, we've built an entire horror genre on the premise that Egypt's dead are just waiting for a reason to reanimate and ruin your vacation. But the reality? Egyptians didn't build curses to haunt us. They built them to protect their peace, to keep sacred places sacred, to say, let me rest, let my soul sail, don't loot my afterlife for a quick buck. And honestly, that feels reasonable. Because if you spent your whole life carving spells into stone, choosing the perfect amulets, and bribing a priest for a deluxe burial package, only for some guy with a torch and a pickaxe to show up, wouldn't you want to curse? So whether you believe in mummy revenge or not, maybe light a candle before reading hieroglyphs aloud in a dark room. Maybe don't pocket that shard of pottery on your next trip to Cairo. Maybe, just maybe, respect the past, not out of fear, but out of awe. Because some echoes travel farther than we think. Let's take a detour from the monumental stoneworks and focus on something often overlooked, yet undeniably crucial to ancient Egypt's success: jobs. Yep, we're talking employment, careers, the daily grind, but make it 3,000 years older and with significantly more linen. First off, no one in ancient Egypt grew up dreaming of being a pharaoh. You didn't apply for that. You were born into it, probably surrounded by gold, servants, and a lot of pressure to look divine in profile. For everyone else, life meant work. Hard, dusty, repetitive, callus-growing work. But surprisingly, Egypt had a wide variety of jobs, not just hauling stones and fanning royalty, though yes, those existed too. Let's start with the base, farmers. These folks made up the majority of the population. They lived near the Nile, tracked flood cycles, and grew wheat, barley, flax, and vegetables in soil so rich it could grow crops from hope alone. But farming wasn't leisurely gardening. It meant long hours in the sun, hauling water, swatting flies, and trying not to step on a cobra. And taxes? Oh yes. Farmers paid in grain, and those taxes went to fund everything else: temples, officials, pyramids, you name it. Miss your quota, and you might find yourself digging irrigation ditches under a very stern overseer. Next level up, artisans and craftsmen. These were the sculptors, painters, metalworkers, potters, and builders. They carved statues, painted tomb walls, made furniture, jewelry, and temple decor. In cities like Deir el-Medina, artisans had their own villages, their own schedules, and, if you believe the graffiti, their own workplace drama. One artist scribbled complaints about missing supplies, unfair treatment, and even slow coworkers. So yes, ancient job rants were real. Being an artisan could be prestigious. If you painted a pharaoh's tomb or crafted something divine, you got recognition and possibly a better afterlife placement. But it was still labor. You worked until your back gave out, your eyesight blurred, or your chisel hand became permanent. And then there were the scribes. Oh, the scribes. These were Egypt's nerdy elites, trained from childhood, fluent in hieroglyphs, demotic, math, contracts, spells, and passive-aggressive notes. If something needed writing, birth record, tax form, spellbook, land dispute, love poem, the scribe handled it. Becoming a scribe was a golden ticket. You worked in the shade, you didn't haul bricks, you got invited to temple ceremonies and palace meetings. You also had the power to erase people, figuratively and literally. In a world where writing equals memory, scribes were the ones holding the pen and the eraser. Above scribes came priests, not just temple choir boys. These guys were spiritual administrators. They ran rituals, managed temple assets, oversaw calendar events, and yes, bathed statues. It sounds odd, but the daily life of a high priest involved bathing, dressing, and feeding the god's image every single day. Priests rotated in and out of duty. They followed purity laws, no garlic, no sex, frequent bathing, basically clean, celibate, and very busy. And if you rose high enough, you controlled land, wealth, and influence that rivaled the kings. And let's not forget the soldiers. Egypt wasn't always at war, but when it was, the army grew fast. Soldiers got food, land, and loot, if they survived. Many were conscripts, but some became career warriors. They fought with spears, bows, and the occasional chariot if things got spicy. Retired soldiers often became guards, police, or personal bodyguards to nobility. Some even ended up managing estates or working in temples. Not bad for a job that started with, try not to get stabbed. There were also merchants and traders. Egypt had extensive trade routes across deserts, rivers, and seas. Gold from Nubia, incense from Punt, cedar from Lebanon. These goods didn't walk themselves to the docks. Merchants managed logistics, bartered deals, and probably had to listen to endless small talk about camel feed. And then, of course, there were servants and slaves. Some were prisoners of war. Others were debt laborers. They cleaned, carried, cooked, built, and were absolutely the backbone of elite households. Some were treated well, others were not. It depended on the household. Slavery in Egypt wasn't racial, it was circumstantial, but it was still harsh and often permanent. Lastly, there were entertainers, dancers, singers, musicians, acrobats. Especially during festivals or royal banquets, you'd find performers with harps, flutes, and drums. Some were part of temple cults, others wandered between towns. Their job was to make people forget, just for a moment, that the sun was hot, taxes were high, and everyone had sand in their sandals. So yes, ancient Egypt had jobs, bureaucracy, performance reviews, probably yelled, and the eternal Monday feeling. But here's the twist. Most Egyptians found meaning in their work, whether it was farming, crafting, or copying the same hieroglyph 10,000 times. They believed it had purpose. It fed the gods, fed the family, fed the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, not just labor, legacy. And here we are, at the end of our dusty, divine, and occasionally blood pressure-raising stroll through ancient Egypt. You've survived the tombs, the sun, the economic policies powered by beer, and at least one curse, we hope. But before we dim the lights for real, let's step back and ask, what actually held all of this together? No, not the pyramids, not even the gods. We're talking about the grand glue of the ancient world, belief. Because if you strip away the gold, the scrolls, the statuary, and the 200-plus gods with animal heads and suspiciously good abs, what you find is a civilization obsessed with balance, with order, with the idea that life, no matter how hard, had meaning as long as you played your part. This belief system wasn't confined to temples. It oozed into every brick, every bite of bread, every complaint scrawled by a tired scribe on a scrap of limestone. It said, if you farm well, speak truth, and respect the Nile, the gods will notice. If not in this life, then the next. It was empowering and terrifying because it meant everything counted. Your thoughts, your words, your deeds, your attitude toward that guy who borrowed your donkey and never gave it back. Egyptians weren't just surviving, they were curating their eternity. They didn't see life as a ladder to climb, but a circle, birth, death, rebirth. Like the sun rising over the east bank and dying on the west, every person followed the same celestial path. Even pharaohs. Yes, pharaohs were divine. Yes, they got cool hats and obelisks, but even they had to stand before Osiris and answer for their actions. No exemptions, just extra accessories. And what about the regular folk? They didn't just passively accept their roles. They engaged with their gods, with each other, with history. They wrote petitions, built shrines, debated justice in the marketplace, left prayers on temple walls and jokes in their tombs. Don't come in unless you brought beer, actual ancient vibe. Even death, that great equalizer, was democratized in theory. With enough faith and the right spells, anyone could reach the field of reeds. Maybe not with a golden sarcophagus and a 200-piece amulet set, but still, with dignity, with hope. That's why Egypt lasted so long. Not because of its armies or its Nile-fed economy, but because everyone bought in. From the priestess painting divine eyeliner to the fishermen tossing nets into crocodile-infested waters, everyone believed they mattered, that their life rippled outward. And us? We're still listening. Still deciphering their stories, reading their grocery lists, marveling at how much eyeliner is too much eyeliner. Answer, it's all sacred. We restore their ruins, decode their symbols, and occasionally trip over sarcophagi that were supposed to stay hidden. Because deep down, Egypt taps into something timeless, that longing to be remembered, that dream of building something that lasts, that hope that death isn't an end, but a new chapter with better lighting and fewer taxes. So tonight, as you slide under your blanket that weighs less than a woolen shroud and rest on your memory foam pillow instead of limestone, take a breath. You've lived 1,000 years in an hour. You've toiled in the fields, argued with scribes, lit incense for gods you can't pronounce, and stared up at stars from a mud brick rooftop while wondering what happens after all this. And maybe, just maybe, you understand the Egyptians a little better now. They weren't magical. They weren't mysterious. They were human. And in some ways, still are. As the stars rise over the eternal Nile and the stone silhouettes of forgotten temples blurred gently into the night, let your breath soften. Let your shoulders drop. You've wandered far, through sunlit fields and shadowed tombs, through courts of justice and dreams of eternity, and now it's time to rest. The world of ancient Egypt may feel distant, cloaked in gold and mystery, but its people were not so different from us. They loved, they laughed, they feared, they hoped. They held their children close. They worked hard under the same sun, and when they lay down at night, perhaps they too wondered what waited in the quiet beyond the horizon. You've walked alongside them tonight, not as an observer, but as a traveler. You've seen what they saw, touched what they touched. And now, as the final flickers of torchlight fade and the wind drifts through open windows, like the hush of time itself, you're exactly where you need to be. There's no need to hold on to the pyramids or the prayers or the pounding of chisel on stone. Let them float away like papyrus boats in the moonlit current. Let your thoughts become soft as linen. Let your breath move like the river, gentle, steady, eternal. You are safe, you are still, you are home. End of script. Sleep well.